Hey YouTube, welcome back. So today I thought we'd take a look at something called oversharing. All right, now I know we've all probably done it, regretted it. Hopefully we've learned to keep better boundaries, but should we take a look what is oversharing and maybe some of the dangers that can happen if we're going around oversharing personal information or details about our lives with people that we've not known so long, especially on social media, for example. Often we're always seeing people oversharing and sharing intimate parts of their life, and then later on there's a backlash, and the private information that's been overshared is weaponized and used to attack the individual with. Where do the lines lie? Who's at fault? Who's to blame? Personally, I think we all have to take some self-responsibility and be accountable for the information that we do put out there. I know for myself personally, I am careful to share parts of myself that I have a self-acceptance with. So while they may not be healed 100%, there's an acceptance that they did happen, right? So if somebody was to take them and throw them at me, there's an acceptance that that did happen. So even if they were to throw it at me, I accept that that happened. And it takes the power away from the person throwing it at you, because if you're at peace with the fact that it happened, not necessarily at peace with what wounded you or what still hurts you about that thing, but if there's an acceptance there, okay, that did happen, all right. I don't need to get defensive about it. I don't need to try and defend myself about it. I don't need to make excuses for it. I don't need to over explain about it. There's just a peaceful acceptance within that thing happened. It takes the power away from anybody else to weaponize personal things about you against you. So I'm going to pause you for a second and find a link, and we're going to jump straight into oversharing. Got it, right? So this article is from the Wall Street Journal, and it's entitled "Thank You for Not Sharing," and the subheading is "What Triggers People to Reveal Too Much, Avoiding the Post Conversations Cringe," right? And I think we've all been there. I know there's been moments in my life where I thought, oh my God, why did I just say that? Why did I just tell that person that, right? Why? There's been times when I've been on the receiving end of hearing really detailed private information, and I've been inside, if I don't know this person well, felt really uncomfortable, right? It does make you feel uncomfortable, and you do feel like you have to match what they're sharing. I don't mean that there's a competition, but you feel inclined as though you need to reciprocate because this person is sharing all this personal private stuff with you. So you feel like you need to reciprocate and open up about private things that have happened to you as well, right? Now I know a different aspect of this is narcissists and predators, sociopaths, cluster B type personalities. Their oversharing is done to ensnare and trap us, right? We walk into the trap. They will purposely share things, overshare things, but they're made up, or they're somebody else's story typically, right? They've heard the story of a prior target or a prior victim, or they've heard it within their community of friends or acquaintances or family, and they steal stories, right? We know they steal stories, and they tend to steal stories about terrible things, trauma stories that have happened to other people, and they make those stories about themselves. But they will do this because if you are a codependent people pleaser fixer, you think with your emotions typically, right? You lead with your emotions, and hearing tragic, traumatic stories from survivors, for example, it pulls at your heartstrings straight away. Codependents don't tend to keep mental boundaries. So as they're hearing the story, they're feeling it, right? Rather than observing it, listening and thinking about it, they're just absorbing all of it and feeling, right? Which then, if it is a toxic individual telling you all this stuff to get you to overshare, because they're always collecting information. They're constantly, narcissistic type personalities or cluster B type personalities, they're all about collecting information, because the information can always be used in some way later. It will come in useful, right? So they will share things that aren't true about themselves, say, so that you share things that are true about yourself, all right? And they will use that information later. Now, I know for myself, this oversharing on social media, it has become a bit of a topic, right? And where does the line lie? If you're sharing private things and it's in a public place like the internet, surely other people have a right to tear it apart and speak on it, right? Well, I would agree with that. I do think we all have to take some self-responsibility about the things that we share. One of my rules for what I choose to share with people that I don't know too well, or on the internet or on my channel, say, I share things that I have accepted, that I have a deep self-acceptance with, right? So if it's about elements of trauma that's happened in my life, there's an acceptance, right? While it may not be healed 100%, or I may still be hurt by elements of this trauma, there's a self-acceptance within, right? So there's a peaceful acceptance that this did happen. So if somebody was to weaponize it, and I recommend and suggest people practice this or get into the habit of going through the process, right, of processing it. And even if it isn't healed, becoming at peace with it, accepting it, right? Because a lot of the time when we're over defending ourselves or being defensive, it's because we haven't accepted whatever it is that's the topic, right? So say for me, for my trauma, for example, right? If somebody was to weaponize, well, your mum never loved you, right? It was probably because you were a horrible kid or ugly or something you did, right? So if they were to twist my story and blame me for being abused, say, there's an acceptance from me within that those things happened. An acceptance, right? A resounding acceptance. So if someone were to say it was your fault, or you were an ugly kid, that's why your mum abused you, I know within, and I've accepted what it was that happened. So I don't need to defend to that stranger and keep reaffirming to them, no, this is how it was. She did A, B, and C, right? You can't say that. I was a kid, right? You can't blame a kid. Right, so you're victim blaming. I'm not going to start climbing the ladder of emotion, right, to fire back at somebody coming out with senseless crap, all right? There's a self-acceptance that it happened. So while it may not be fully healed, there's an acceptance that happened. And also, I have worked on my mental agility, right? Mind over matter shit. So for me, within now, what I think of me matters more than what you think of me, right? So, and that's solid. That is solid, resounding. What I think of me matters more to me than what anybody else thinks of me, right? So if that person were to be thinking, oh, well, you know, you were a bad kid, that's why A, B, and C happened to you. You deserved it, okay? That isn't going to trigger me or set off any kind of defensiveness or anger or rage or pain or upset. It's just not going to trigger me because I have that self-acceptance with what happened and how it happened, right? And my validation of myself is stronger than your invalidation of me, okay? So it wouldn't bother me. So for me, sharing things, well, yeah, I can still say, if I observe it happening, right, that it's very cruel to do, it's a sick thing to do, it's disturbing, right? But again, the person has to have some self-responsibility. We all do with what we share. But being careful what you share and choosing to share things that you have a self-acceptance with makes you bulletproof when the trolls show up or hateful people start picking things apart. If you have self-acceptance and you can self-validate, and your self-validation is more powerful to you than the invalidation of other people, then you're bulletproof, all right? You can go anywhere, be amongst anything said about you, and it isn't even going to raise one tiny hair on the back of your neck. You're not even going to turn around to check who said it. You're just going to keep going. It doesn't matter. It doesn't faze you, all right? It's self-empowering. These kind of tools, these kind of coping skills They're not just fallacies, they work, right? So if you work on your self-acceptance, what you share isn't going to be an issue, because you out openly and within accept what happened. And then you've got the self-validation aspect, that how you validate yourself and what you think about yourself is stronger to you and means more to you than what other people say about you, right? So I'm going to jump into this. Thank you for not sharing article after I've just jabbered on for 8 minutes, and these are supposed to be 10-minute videos, so I've got 2 minutes now, right? After, is that the beginning how it starts? Yeah, right. After arguing with her husband one Sunday, Vasava Kumar was so upset that she called her mum, her dad, her sister and 3 of her closest friends, who has not been here. This is it, she told each of them. He is never going to understand me. I want a divorce. Guess what happened the next day? Ms. Kumar and her husband made up. They said they were sorry, hugged, and agreed to put the argument behind them. Yet Ms. Kumar, a 30-year-old life coach and social worker in Overland Park, Kansas, still had some more apologizing to do to 6 other people. I dropped a bomb on everyone, but now I was fine and dandy, she says. I had to go and clean it up. We tend to overshare when we try to overcome our own anxiety about what the other person is thinking. And that's true, right? As part of all this self-healing and coping skills, one great tool I learned was to embrace the awkward silences that show up, right? And now I consider myself a master at awkward silences. I am comfortable with awkward silences. I do not, do you know that urge to want to say something, right? To kill the awkward silence. So you try to find something to say. And then usually what you try to find to say, because it's so quick and you're panicked and there's an anxiety, you quite often say something that either sounds stupid, well, you do if you're called Sonia, that either sounds stupid, or you share something you really didn't want to share, right? You end up saying something and you're like, oh my God, why did I just say that? I can remember like in my 20s dating, those are the moments when you do that kind of dumb shit, right? There's an awkward silence and you have to rush to fill it because you think, oh my God, there can't be an awkward silence. We can't be quiet. Like, it'll be like, I have nothing to talk about. Like, what we're going to do if there's an awkward silence is just going to be awkward, right? Embrace the awkwardness. That's what I say. Embrace it. Learn to get comfortable with it, right? Figure out what it is within that's causing you to feel all this awkwardness and anxiety. And you kill the, you simultaneously kill the awkward silence because you become at peace with it, okay? There are quiet periods between people. And very often, narcissists use your anxiety to fill an awkward silence. Like, they will be quiet, right, purposely, because it almost, if you will, works on prompting the other person to try and fill it, right? They will jump to try and fill it. And often, like I just said, in those instances, we overshare something in our rush to behave, in our haste to close up the awkward silence. So they will utilize that. They will let there be these silences, right? And you will rush to fill them. Don't. Just be comfortable with it, right? So, too much information. Avoid it and recover from it. Number 1, recognize situations where you might overshare. You might be eager to make a good impression or nervous about what others think of you, right? So if you really think about that and take that on board, what is it? Are you eager to make a good impression, right? Or are you nervous about what other people think of you? Like for me, it was always nervous about what other people think, right? I put too much stock and weight into what other people thought instead of what I thought, right? Number 2, before revealing information, ask yourself, does the listener have time to listen, right? Is he or she emotionally available at this time? And I was just going to say, as I read that top line, I was just going to say, I had to learn, right, to ask or try to ask. See, I am too shy to ask quite a lot of the time, right? But I had to learn to ask. I need to talk about some deep shit. Have you got time to listen, right? Now, I'm often too shy to say that to friends because I feel like, me personally, when I'm talking about what might be going on in my life, I feel like I'm putting an emotional burden on a friend, right? So it's tough for me, even though I consider myself open, right? I'm always conscious about what it's doing to the other person. Like, do they think they need to rush in and fix this? That I always feel this stress that if I talk, the person's going to feel like they have to do something. They have to physically do something, right, to help whatever the problem is. So that makes me anxious about sharing whatever it is that's going on at different times. Right, so ask somebody, are they emotionally available? Because if you are going to share something deep, maybe it's about a trauma, the other person, if they're in a rush, and I know it's happened to me before, someone has just like lumped a load of stuff on me and I've had to go, or I'm making myself late trying to answer the person because I feel rude after they've just offloaded something very deep or heavy, and I just now have to go. I struggle with being able to do that. It really messes with my head, right? So number 3, will sharing whatever it is, rather than relieve your anxiety, make you feel more anxious? Because if it will, then don't share it. So slow things down, right? Think about things beforehand. Slow things down. So if there is an awkward silence, for example, slow it down. Think about what you're going to say, right? And if you are tempted to blurt something out, that's deep, heavy, a trauma. Is sharing it actually going to change how you feel? So don't feel pressured into sharing it, is the point, okay? So I guess these are like points to consider, right, to quell or oversharing. So number 4, imagine the negative effects of oversharing and the regret you might feel afterwards, right? Go back to teenage years and telling somebody how you feel about them. Will the negative effects make you regret what you just said? Oh my God. This is having me relive all kinds of memories, this is. Yeah, it will make me regret it afterwards. Don't do it. Don't do it. I think I've always had this problem oversharing. Yeah, I was in my mid to late 30s by the time I realised oversharing was a thing, right? Think twice. And then what's this? If you have already overshared, here's some tips, right? Number 1, think twice about revisiting the topic with the listener. He or she will probably forget about it if you don't drag out the awkwardness. Number 2, if you must return to the subject, keep it brief. Number 3, your message is an apology. Don't seek for approval. State your apology in as few words as possible and move on, right? And I can remember actually pretty recently, I had to apologize to someone for oversharing. I was triggered and I wrote out what I wrote out. And then afterwards, that when I calmed down, I thought, oh my God, why have you done that? Right now, you've just dumped all this shit on this other person. And I was thinking in my head, like, I know we get on and we're cool, but I don't know if that person's going to appreciate me just dumping all that on them, right? I felt terrible. Oh my God, I'm cringing, right? So then I did have to, or I felt like I should apologize because I didn't want it to affect the friendship or have made that person feel awkward. And just even thinking about it now, it's enough to give me bloody flashbacks, right? So yeah, so if you're going to do the apology, if you have overshared, right, as I have, don't seek their approval. Apologize, right, in as few words as possible. Don't be doing a me writing essay after essay, right, and then move on, right? There's another portion of this. It's so weird how this article's laid out, right? Ever share too much information and you weren't even tipsy? I call it BYB, blabbing your business. It's happening a lot these days thanks to reality TV and social media sites, where it's perfectly normal for people to share every single detail of their lives, no matter how mundane or personal. In the culture we live in, it's hard to remember that some things should be kept private. It isn't all Facebook's fault. Experts say that oversharing often happens when we are trying subconsciously to control our own anxiety, and I would tend to agree with that, right? This effort is known as self-regulation, and here is how it works. When having a conversation, we can use up a lot of mental energy trying to manage the other person's impression of us, right? That's key, that part, right? When we're having a conversation, we can use up a lot of mental energy trying to manage how that person is perceiving us, the impression that they're getting from us, okay? We need to let go of that element. That's, again, something I've had to revisit. This was a milestone I wasn't taught or shown in my early adult years to adult years. I wasn't ever, this shit wasn't explained to me, okay? So, self-regulation. When having a conversation, we can use up a lot of mental energy in trying to manage the other person's impression of us. We try to look smart, witty, and interesting, but the effort required to do this leaves less brain power to filter what we say and to whom, which makes total sense. This explains why people often blurt out embarrassing things to precisely the people they want to impress most. Whether it's the boss, a first date, or a future in-law. Consider this scenario. Your boss walks by and doesn't even make eye contact. You feel uneasy and think of something you need to discuss with him or her. If you are psychologically aware, you will realize you are feeling anxious and picking up on rejection cues, says Hal Shorey, a psychologist and assistant professor for the Institute for Graduate Clinical Psychology at Widener University in Chester, PA. You're trying to re-establish connection. Does this work? Of course not. We often regret our disclosures and feel like an idiot, and then worry even more about what the listener is thinking. We may feel compelled to fix the situation, leading to, you guessed it, even more blabbing. It's a cruel downward spiral. I know I'm not the only person who overshares. I got the idea for this column after 3 people in 1 week said these terrifying words to me. I want to tell you something that I've never told anyone. Not my spouse, not my therapist, or my best friend. Still, some people by nature blab more than others. They tend to be individuals with an anxious or preoccupied attachment style, according to attachment theory, which psychologists developed starting in the mid-1900s. Our attachment system is the evolutionary byproduct of a process humans developed to stay alive. Dr. Shorey says, attachment style is partly genetic, but it is also determined in part by how our parents related to us as young children. There are 3 basic attachment types: secure, anxious, and avoidant. Secure people, roughly 55% of the population, had parents who were consistently caring and responsive. These people are typically loving and comfortable with intimacy. The other 45 have an attachment style that is more problematic, either anxious, avoidant, or some combination. And I can agree, I think I'm more avoidant. Avoidant people, about 15% of the population, try to minimize closeness. Their parents typically were withholding or unresponsive. How true is this sounding for me? I haven't read this either yet, this part. These folks aren't your blabbers. In fact, in interviews to determine personality type, therapists consider short, concise answers to be a marker of an avoidant attachment style. Well, I wouldn't say I give short and concise answers to anything. So there's a flaw in that system. Long, drawn-out answers typically indicate an anxious type. Anxious people, who make up roughly 15% of the population, typically had parents who were inconsistently nurturing. That rings true for me too. They are overly sensitive to social cues and prone to over-managing their personal connections. The other 15% are a combination. A lot of these elements ring true for that as well for me. Or what I'm working on healing at right this current moment is insane. Of course, we all have our own bursting point when under emotional stress we can no longer contain ourselves, says Sharon Gilchrist O'Neill, a Mount Kisco, NY marriage and family therapist. They all have humongous titles, these people. They think, oh God, does that feel good to talk? She says, but they're definitely not thinking of the other person and that this may hurt their relationship. What? The real trouble starts when you share information that isn't really yours to share. In her therapy practice, Ms. O'Neill says she regularly sees people who tell someone about their own marital problems or divorce or separation before it actually happens. Another common scenario involves mothers sharing information about their daughters. In all these cases, she says, it usually comes back to haunt them. Now you will see narcissistic mothers especially, they will overshare their daughter's private information all over social media. So they will tell something personal about their child, but what they're doing is they're garnering supply from it. Because if, for example, they say, my daughter is abusive or she's horrible to me, they will utilize that to garner empathy and sympathy from the audience or the people listening, right? Or they may share some trouble or trauma that a child is going through presently. And again, they will manipulate the child's story, right? And any pain or grief that the child would be going through with whatever they're describing to you, they will make the trauma or issue be about their pain, right? So they're using what has happened or is happening to their child, and they will use it on social media as a cue or as a way to garner supply off a listening audience, like the sympathy. Oh my God, I can't believe you're going through that. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope they're better. And then you'll get continual questions throughout. How's your daughter? How's your son? How's this? How's that, right? It's used to garner supply with. And it ends up hurting the child as well, especially when you're giving this information out online, right? So how do you stop yourself from blabbing too much? Do what your mother said. Stop and think before you open your mouth. Go through the process in your mind where you walk through the ultimate effects of sharing, says Miss O'Neill. There are specific questions you should ask yourself. Does my listener have time right now? And is he or she emotionally available to listen? That's a very important question. I learned a few years ago, I need to be sure that somebody has the emotional availability to take on what it is I want to talk about right now, okay? You should always ask permission, because you don't just have a right to dump things on somebody. And if they're in a rush and need to leave, then you get pissed off with them because it's a bad time for them and you've just shared this. And because now you feel anxious and you feel a bit shitty because of their response, now you're going to have a go at them or make them feel bad because they need to go. You should always ask permission before you're about to share deep things or things that are not on a superficial or not in a superficial language. Okay, so if it's going to get deep and you're going to have to be sharing things that are really personal or particularly traumatic, you do need to ask permission. Hey, I need to talk about something deep. It's pretty deep. Or I need to talk about something. It's pretty deep. Do you have time right now, or is there any chance we could catch up later? Because I'd really like to hear your opinion on this, or I'd really like to, I don't know, see what you've got to say about it. See what you think. Okay, so just ask permission before you go on to overshare whatever it is that you feel like you want to share. Will the blabbing, another question to ask yourself, will the blabbing relieve your anxiety or make it worse? So think about that question before you go on to share. If I share this, am I going to feel better? Is it going to relieve my burden any? Like, I know for me, a lot of the time, relieving the burden can be very helpful for me, for my personality type and the way I am. Just offloading it and being able to say it out loud, and even just be validated, right? And someone says, you know what, that is a lot. That's a lot. I'm not surprised you feel shit. Sometimes hearing that is, I mean, it has a value of £1 million right on it. Just hearing somebody validate you sometimes can be all you need to feel slightly lifted, less pressured and less stressed out. So think about it. Are you going to be relieved of any anxiety, or are you going to be worrying, what does that person think of me now? I wonder what they're thinking. I wish I hadn't have said it. I shouldn't have said it. I don't really know them that well. Do all that first, all right? Calm down, slow things down, and think. If you should find that you have said too much, how do you recover? Most people think it's a good idea to go back and apologise. Most often, though, it isn't. When I work with people in my office, I try to help them think through what the consequences will be. Will there be a boomerang effect? If you decide that your listener has fundamentally changed the way he or she sees you, then apologise, but keep it short and low key. You should say, listen, I don't want to make a big deal of this, but I want you to know I embarrassed myself and this isn't like me, and leave it at that. Ms. Kumar recalls she was always an oversharer. Her childhood nickname was Loose Lips. I did it primarily as a way to connect with people, to get them to like me, she says. When she recalled her father to apologise for telling him prematurely that she was getting a divorce, he started to cry. He said, I just can't take this anymore. I am getting too old. I am taking blood pressure medication. I have a nervous breakdown every time I see your name come up on my phone. These days, Ms. Kumar says, before speaking, she asks herself, why am I sharing this with this specific person? What am I looking for here? And there's the key. You've got to be honest. Are you looking for somebody to validate you, fuss over you, right? Fluff you up a bit. Is that what you're looking for? Because we can do that to ourselves within, okay? We can self-regulate, emotionally regulate ourselves with coping skills. We don't always need to be going to other people and needing them to prop us up emotionally, right? So ask yourself that question, what am I looking for? Otherwise, it's almost like you've spilt debris all over other people's lives, telling them all your personal stuff, she says, and then you have to go back and clean up the mess that you created. And that's the end of the article. Wall Street Journal. What makes people overshare? Thank you for not sharing, okay? So, and now I'm going to say, share your thoughts down below. Have you been an oversharer? Are you still an oversharer? Is it something you struggled with? Definitely is for me, okay? Now I'm careful to share, like I said at the beginning, things that I have a self-acceptance with. So if they were to come back publicly, I would be able to manage that emotionally. The things with people privately, like one-to-one friendships, like I said recently, I felt I did dump on somebody and then have to go back and apologize because I felt, it was a bit of a boundary overstep, and I'm so conscious of boundaries and them being respected. So I did go back and try and apologize to that person. I do think they accepted the apology and things are okay, but it's just an awkward position to find yourself in. So slow the process down. When you feel that anxiety building, slow down your mind. Don't follow through with the anxiety, right? Instead, freeze, if anything. Press pause. Notice it. I am feeling hyper anxious, right? The silence is making me feel awkward. I feel like I want to say something to kill the silence, right? Walk it back down, right? There's just a silence, right? Be at one with the silence, right? And I am half joking, but I'm fully serious at the same time. Become at one with the awkward silence. That's my tip. Master that mental agility, right? And you will conquer the anxiety pushing you to overshare details that you don't want to share or that you're possibly going to be embarrassed about later. Okay, so I'll wrap it up here. Thank you so much for watching. Consider leaving me a like or a dislike if you didn't like the video. Share your thoughts. No oversharing. And until next time, love lots and bye for now.